All right, it's right around 1, so I'm going to get started. I have no idea how long this is going to take. What I want to do is go over a few of the chapters that were in your book and show you some of the database stuff, both in this class and in the following class. All right. Now, as always, there is a folder out there in the in-class folder, but I want to quickly show you what's in that folder. All right. In chapters 40 and 41 of your book, they give you both an overview of Sqlite, and then they give you an Android tutorial where they build the interface that they're going to use in chapters 42 and 43. All right. So what I did was I've got a whole project there, but it doesn't have any of the code in it. Does that make sense? So the interface is built. So if you want to add the code yourself, you can. All right. But, well, what if I don't want to add the code, Jeff? Well, then I added it. It's in here too. So this is the same project, but with a code added. Then I went back and thought, I started working on the one for Swift, and I put all these comments in, and I thought, I have no comments in this code I just put in. So I went back to the same one that I just done, and I added comments to it. All right, so there's 3 iterations is what I'm telling you. Now, what they explain in chapter 40 is, everybody remember this. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn here. You all know that, and this is probably the only time ever I'm going to bring up XAMPP in this class. But if you go here and you open this up and you open up MySQL, that if you click shell right here and you type in MySQL minus uroot, you're into the command line version of MySQL. Does that make sense to everyone? Well, one of the things that they show at the beginning of this chapter is how to do the equivalent of that for Sqlite. Okay? So what I did with some help from John, showing me basically where to go look for it, was I also put a thing out here in that folder that's called Sqlite Android. And it explains here the steps, and I'm going to go through them with you just so you see them. All right? And if you do that, what you can do is at your desktop, at a DOS prompt, you can be running Sqlite there. All right, so if you wanted to learn Sqlite, which is more or less a watered-down version of MySQL or of SQL Server, all right, but there are some differences, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. Okay. In addition, the way that this is handled, the way that Sqlite is handled in Android land versus iOS land is night and day. It's really different between the two. All right. The good news, especially for Mike Rates, is the fact that it's much easier in Android. So you don't have to worry about the iOS stuff because this is much easier. It's much more straightforward, at least in my opinion. One of the things they talk about, it's either in chapter 40 or 41, is they talk about some of the Sqlite classes that get used in here. So notice there's a cursor class, there's an Sqlite database class, there's an Sqlite open helper class, and a content value class. There are other ones, but these are the ones that get mentioned in the book. All right, so what I did was I just put hyperlinks out there, and as you can see for all these classes, they're just things under developer.android.com. All right, so just so you know, all that stuff is out there. All right. Usually what I do too is at the end of class, I'll make sure I didn't leave anything out or screw anything up. And once I find that, then I go back and I zip the file. And after I zip the file, then I go and throw it out there on Blackboard. Okay, so it will be out there. Okay. So we went over this a little bit last time. My hope is by now you all understand what database tables are. You understand what a schema is. You understand what fields are and data types and rows and primary keys are. All right, so my hope is at least that there's nothing that was in there that's a surprise to you. And if there was, it's pages 377 and 378 in the book. All right. So if we look right here, kind of important stuff in here. I'm not reading to you. But if you notice, typically when you use a relational database management system like MySQL or SQL Server or Oracle, they're standalone database servers that you go and you run with. Even with what we're doing with XAMPP, we're using our machine as a server, and part of it, what it's doing there is hosting MySQL. Well, when you work with Sqlite, it's different because Sqlite is embedded right into the programming language itself. All right? And in order to do that, it has to be able to communicate with, in this case with Android, in the other case with Swift. All right? And the actual Sqlite package was written in C. All right? So there are a bunch of different wrappers and a bunch of other stuff that you can work with it. It's not very difficult, I didn't think, to do this stuff in Android. It's a pain in the butt to do it in iOS. All right, I built the interface, and I went and built it this morning because I forgot to do it last night. And so I built it this morning, and everything was fine until I ran it, and then I clicked where I was going to add something, and boom, it just blew up. But I'm giving you what I have anyway, so you have it out there. Okay? Now, again, if you want more, as I mentioned to you, one of the things that I put out there is this is just the home, right off the home page for Sqlite, but it's the about part of the home page. So, it's right there. I'm not going to read a bit of it to you, but if you want to know more about it, you can take a look at that. Okay? All right. They talk a little bit about SQLs, or structured query language, SQL, whatever you want to call it. So, if you want to do this, if you want to follow along with me, fine. If you don't, that's also fine. But what they ask you to do here is, and I don't even think you have to have a project running, but you have to have the your Android virtual device running. So in other words, if you want to follow along and do the stuff that's shown in here, you've got to have that up and running. This is what you build in here, just so you know. All right, so in other words, if you notice, if I come through here, well, it's gone to sleep just like I have. But it's not rec. There we go. So if I come through here and I type in, for example, this is what we're going to build. All right, so I'll come in here and I'm going to type in the name of a product, okay? And I was just working. It was a Mythical hardware store. So I said, you got nuts and bolts. So nuts, and the quantity was, let's say we've got 1,000 of those, okay? So now if I come in here and click there and click add, that's added it to a database. And you can see how it has literally gone in there right now and it's removed the stuff that was in there before. Okay? So if I come back in here, and I think we just put nuts in there. So if I click nuts again, and I click the find, which is right there, you notice how it brings it back up. Does that make sense? It's a very, very simplistic relational database management system. It has literally 3 fields in it. For whatever reason, when they did this between this book and the iOS book, they used different databases. That one's got in there a person's ID, their name, their address, and their phone number, I think it is. We'll look at that in just a bit. All right? But if we take a look here, I don't want to do that. And if I come in here, let's see, I'm trying to remember what these were for. I can delete that record too. See that? All right. And I forgot to put the code in here to make that go away, and it's not going away. But you'll notice I just literally clicked that last button which says delete. So if I come back here again and I go in there to search for nuts, and I click the find button, comes back, no match found. Does all that make sense? So it's a very, very simplistic relational database management system. And with what you see in here, All right, there are 3 fields in it. You create a table. The table has 3 fields in it. It's got a product ID, which is just referred to as ID, which is an integer field. It's an auto increment field. It's a primary key field, etc. All right. Then we've got product name, and that's put in there as a string, all right, or text in the database. And then product quantity, which is put in, I believe that's put in as an int. It may not be. I don't remember. All right. So the idea is what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to put something. So if I come back in here and I say hammer. All right, so that's the product name. And I come over here for the quantity and I say we've got 250 of them. All right, and I click. Now that's been put in there. Okay, how do I know that? Well, I can search for it, so I can come back in here, and again, I can type in hammer. I can click the middle button, which says find on it, and there it is. Does that make sense? So it's a way of very quickly being able to throw stuff into a database or grab stuff back from a database. So this is our interface. This is very similar to stuff we did last semester when you think about it, when we were working with PHP. There we'd build a form, and you would take that form and you would be able to add a record, you click a button, and boom, you throw it into a Mysql database. We're doing the same type of thing right now. All right? So, if you do come in and you launch that, what they tell you to do is they tell you to basically, if you want to bring this up, where you, let's say that, let's assume for a second you knew nothing about relational database management systems, nothing, and you wanted to learn. So you wanted to do the equivalent of bring up XAMPP and bring it up into the command mode. These are the steps you'd use. So with the with this running right here, you'd bring up literally, you'd bring up a window. When I say a window, you would bring up a command prompt. And you change over to, on the C drive, Android-SDK-platform-tools. Do you have to remember that? No, because it's all on the piece of paper there. I wrote that I just showed it to you. All right? So I did that. I went over there, as they said. Then they said, all right, go ahead and start the shell. Boom, I did that. And it came up, and the prompt wasn't exactly like this, but it was pretty close. And then they said, okay, once you do that, change over to your data directory right off the root, and under the data directory is another data directory, okay? And once, so you're literally in there under C:\data/data/data. And then they say go in there and create a brand new folder or directory that's called com.example.dbexample. And then change to that directory, CD is change directory. And then underneath there, make another directory that's called databases and change to the databases directory. Once you've done all that, if you follow their steps, you're literally going to end up being, you're ready to go and start SQLite. All right? So this is the command to start it then, literally right there. You type in, after you follow all their steps, SQLite3 space /mydatabase.db. That starts up SQLite 3 or version 3, and it wasn't exactly like this, but it looks almost identical to that. All right. Then if you want to do that, we already created the database earlier. It's called mydatabase.db. So then in that database, they're going to come in and they're going to create a table. The table's called contacts. Why they put an underscore, all right, under the before the ID, it says there it's essential that the key be named _ID in order for the database to be fully accessible using all of the Android database related classes. So long story short, you call your ID field _ID because that's what Android expects you to do. All right? So if you want to be able to use the built-in Android functionality, you better call it that. All right? So we create a simple contacts table that has their ID, their name, their address, and their phone number. And once you do that, you can then come in and start adding records in. This should look real familiar to you. It's not identical to the way we did it in MySQL, but it's very, very similar. Insert into table name, then in parens, the name of your fields. What field is not here? ID. Why is it not there? Because it's an auto increment field. It's a primary key. It's going to get generated for us automatically. So this says the name is Bill Smith. The address is 123 Main Street, California. The phone number is 123-555-2323. One thing about this is if you go and look on the screen here for a second, the author was as generic as possible. In other words, for phone number, he just said it's of type text. So you could have put in there, hello there, how are you? And it would have taken that for a phone number, which is idiotic. All right? But the author just set it up like that. Really, they should have set it up differently. All right? I would have probably made that a varchar type of field or whatever. All right? But they didn't do that. Okay, so once you go and you fill up the table like this and you put in these two records they tell you to put in, again, should look real familiar to you. Select star from table name. And this is what you get. And they use a pipe sign as a delimiter in there. So one, pipe sign, the name, pipe sign, the address, pipe sign, the phone number, and then the next one. So you could enter as many records into here as you wanted to enter. Okay? And notice, we see select star, it gives us everything, but we can put a where on there, all stuff you've learned again in the past. All right? And then to get out of it, .exit. Okay, that's all fine and dandy, but let's talk about how you get this stuff to work in here and what you do basically to make it work with Android. All right? So if you look in here, as they mentioned, they'll talk about 3 or 4 classes in here that are really important. The first one is the cursor class. You may or may not be aware of this. I don't think we really, let's see, I don't remember if the people in here had me for the 147 class, or if you had Denny, or if you had Jim Schmidt, or just who the heck you had. All right? But usually what I try to do in the 147 class, I don't always get around to it, but what I try to do is show people a little bit of actual programming in MySQL. And the reason that I'm telling you that is when you actually program in MySQL, what you can do in that language, and you can do it in Oracle and you can do it in SQL Server, is you set up what's called a cursor. And what the cursor is, literally, if you run a query, the cursor holds everything that gets returned from the query. Everything. Every field, every record, everything. Then you can loop through that cursor and get out the information that you want. All right? The reason I'm telling you that is that's pretty much what they're talking about here. Again, I don't want to read to you, but the idea is virtually the same. All right? And they mention in here some of the things that you want to work with, so you're literally working right with the database. So you can close, you can count, you can move around, etc. All right, so that's the first class. Then there's an Sqlite database class. The stuff that's in here should look real familiar to you. Again, you know what inserts are, you know what deletes are, all right? And if you want to run a query, notice it's exec SQL. And that's if the query does not return result data. What does that mean? That means that if you do an insert or you do a delete, you end up doing an exec SQL. Does that make sense? Because all that comes back will say something like 1 row added or 1 row deleted. It's not going to return any actual data. All right? But when you do a select statement, so when you return stuff, you're going to end up doing a raw query, is what they're saying right here. All right? Then there's Sqlite Open Helper. Notice as it says, it's a helper class. This is the way that they handle it in here. Because, again, there is nothing special. Just wait till you see in the next class all the jumping around that we have to do to make this work with Swift. All right, I thought it was like, oh my God, I can't believe what a pain in the butt this is. So it says there when you work with this helper class, it says there are two different things that you're going to have to worry about in here. All right. Notice there's an onCreate. And that onCreate, as it says, that's called when you create the database the first time. All right. So anything special you want to do when you create it. Now the onUpgrade is if you decide that what you're going to do is maybe you've got version 1 of the database. Now somebody comes out with version 2 of it. What we'll do in the program that we'll look at in just a minute, in the onUpgrade, what we do is we just drop the existing database and add it again. All right. So also a few more things in here. As it says under the notable methods, we use this one in the program, the Get Writable Database. Notice opens or creates a database for reading and writing. All right, so it's both. It's read and write. We don't use the Get Readable in here, but if we wanted to do that and open something up for reading only, that's how we do it. We've talked about this before, that we talked about things like views, and I mentioned that if you have different people who are looking at your database, all right, for instance, I can go in and I can look at my payroll data. Hopefully that makes sense to you. I can look at it. I can go back and I can get a record of all of my W-2s and all of the pay stubs they've given me, etc. And I can see how much I make, but I can't change that stuff. Because if I could do it, I would have done it a long time ago. All right. But I can't do that. So the stuff that's in there is readable. All right. But if they decide they're going to change my pay grade or something here, people who work here at Blackhawk in the payroll department, they would have writable permission. That should make sense to everybody. All right. The other thing that we do use in the program that we're going to look at in just a minute is this content values. And notice what it says. It's another class. It's a convenience class. It allows you to work with key value pairs. What's a key value pair? Again, first name, Jeff. Last name, Scott. Job title, IT instructor. All right. First name, last name, and IT title, those are keys. Jeff, Scott, and IT instructor, those are values. All right. So that's what they talked about in that first chapter, and hopefully there's nothing in there that was all that mind-blowing or whatever to you. All right. What they do then in the next chapter here is they have you create this. Okay? And the way that they have you create this is they have you come in and in here, they have you go in and make this right here into a table. So you literally set up a table layout for those 3 fields, all right, or those three rows. There's 3 rows. Each row has 2 columns. So they tell you how to set that up. Then when you get done with that, underneath it, then they have you come in and go back and add a linear layout where you put your buttons. So what ends up happening is this. And that's what they're showing you in the picture here that is in your book on page 386. So you start with a linear layout. Underneath that linear layout, if you look at what's in blue there, that's the buttons. So that goes into another linear layout. And here, you've got a table layout. Why am I telling you that? Because this is the first time what they're doing is they're embedding layouts within layouts. So you start with a linear layout, you put a table layout inside of that, then when you get all done filling up everything for the table layout, you create another linear layout into the original linear layout. And it may sound hard, it really and truly wasn't difficult. They talk in here about setting up a table layout and table rows and views. We've done some of that stuff in here already. Maybe you remember that where you create a table layout, then you start dragging rows out. All right, I know we did that when we did the tip calculator last semester. We did that. All right, so they have you come in and create a database project that they literally just call database. And then they show you here how they set it up. So this is the linear layout. The big thing when you look at this, and again, it's not that this is that big a thing, but notice they've set the orientation up to vertical. All right, they had you do that. They have you remove every single other thing that's there when you first bring the system up and replace it with this. All right? And then they have you go in and they have you set up a table layout. And when you set up the table layout, where you see up here in blue, that's exactly what it looks like when you get done. No formatting, and there's nothing in it. But notice you've got your linear layout that you started with, and now you put in there a table layout. Okay, so they really have you build this incrementally, and then when you get all done, what they show you is what it should look like in the XML. All right. So under the table layout, you're going to put 3 rows in there. So you drag in 3 rows. So just drag table row, table row, table row, and then you start filling them up. And as they show you here, and again, this is on page 389 in your book, they tell you what to call this stuff. I didn't like their names, so I literally call these this one here I called product ID. Well, let's take it from the top. I call that product ID label, product ID text view, product name label, product name is either text view or edit text, I don't remember, and product quantity label and product quantity again, either, whatever the heck it was. These, I think I just call them like button add, button find, and button delete. All right, the author gave you names, but I liked my names better. I didn't like I didn't think theirs were real descriptive. So went in there and did all that stuff, added all the stuff to it as they told us to do here, added the button stuff to it. All right, what you're going to find out if you do that, everything's going to look squished together because there's been no formatting put into it yet. So they have you put in a little bit of formatting when you get done. Basically, as it says, adjusting the layout margins. All right, to actually do some formatting. So they have you go in there and they say basically highlight it so everything, all 3 rows are highlighted, go down to all and put in 10 DP. Remember, that's density independent pixels. All right, so you've got 10 pixels basically worth of margin all the way around everything, just to space it out a little bit. Then what they do for the rest of the chapter in here, and this is pages 391, 392, and 393, is they show you how they want everything in their setup. Everything. All right. So if you were to follow just chapter 40 and chapter 41, those 2 chapters that I've gone over thus far, if you just followed all of those steps, then you would have what I have in here. All right, just in that part, because there hasn't been any code put in there yet. All right, they just built the interface. They talked about what Sqlite was, and then they built the interface in chapters 40 and 41. In chapter 42, which is not a real long chapter, but that's where they put all the code in. It's about 9 or 10 pages long, but almost all of the code that's in there, or all the stuff that's in there in those 10 pages is code. All right. So I'm going to go over what they say here, and then I'm going to go and show you the code. It's too hard to bounce back and forth. So again, this is your schema that they've got set up. You've got 3 fields: the product ID, the product name, and the product quantity. You can see their types. All right. So they come in and they say, okay, we've done all this. And something that you're going to hear about a little bit later, not in this class, but in the DIP class in a few weeks, is we are going to talk a little bit about model view controller. All right. And notice it says here, creating the data model. This is the database data. The database contains an ID, a product name, and a quantity. That's what it contains. All right, that's the 3 fields that are in that table. All right, so the author comes in and says, okay, after you've come in here, and you've got your main activity, okay, then the author said, if you look up on the screen here, you were told then to go back in here, all right, and literally go back in again underneath your package and do a file, new class, and create another class. And that's the product class that's right here. And for some reason, I just managed, oh, there we go. All right. And that product class that you see right here, that's the same class, all right, that they're showing in the book on pages 396 and 397. Now, I added some comments in there, but it shouldn't be anything that people in here don't understand. All right. So what do we have here? Notice we add a bunch of stuff, but we've got in here what? These are our three fields. Our ID, our product, and our quantity. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Then we've got to map them up to what's in our XML. All right. And then we come in here, and we're going to look at this in just a minute. But here, that's our database handler. This is how we're tying it to the database. Remember, we want to go back and forth. We want to be able to either take something here, put information in here, click the button to save it, and have it go into the database, or we want this to be blank. We want to be able to put a product name in here, click here, and have it find the associated product. I will just tell you, if you take a look at all of the code that's in here, the author, there's absolutely nothing wrong with what's in here, except for one thing. The author literally has done no validation whatsoever. All right? So I could keep putting the same thing in there if I wanted to. All right? Because there's nothing that precludes me from doing that. It'd be so I'd want to make checks in there to check and see if I already had a hammer in the database type of an idea. All right? Now, even though I can keep putting in hammers, remember that every time I do it, they're different hammers. Look at the picture. Why would they be different? What's going to be different every time? You're looking right at it. The product ID. So if I go and add another one in here, if I come back in here and add a new one and put in hammer 500, that's going to have product ID 3. All right. The way that this is set up, the author made this interface really simplistic, that if you've got several different things that are called hammer, all it does is find the first one. You could change that so that it would find multiple occurrences if we had multiple occurrences of hammer. I mean, and think about it. There could be a regular hammer, be a claw hammer, there could be a jackhammer. There could be all sorts of things that had hammer in them. All right. So what are we doing in here? Well, if we look here, this is the code right there. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that's the code right there when we click the Find button. Every single time, again, it's got to connect, for lack of better words, to the database. And then we're telling it to find the product based on what we put into the product name right there. All right? If it comes back and it's not null, what does that mean? That means it found something. All right? So instead of hammer, if I had mistyped and I put himmer in there, it should come back and find this. Does that make sense? All right? But otherwise, if it finds something, then it's going to that's telling it to go in and fill up the rest of my form. All right? When we remove something, it's a very similar type of thing. All right? But notice this time we've got a result because we can't remove something that doesn't exist. Okay? That should never be possible anyway. All right? But it says there, okay, if we do this and it worked, that means that that result, after we try to delete it, that result's going to return true. Remember, that's a shortcut for if result equal true. So if that happens, it worked. So we're going to say record deleted, and we're going to grab all the fields that we had, just set them back so there's nothing in there in case we want to delete something else. But if we do this, again, this is a validation type of thing. It's going to come back and say there's no match found. You can't delete it. All right. So we've got remove, we've got lookup, and there's add. Those are the three things that we basically would be able to do. All right. And if you look in here, you go, well, wait a minute. You've got all this stuff in there, but you really don't have an update. Well, when you call lookup, you can go in and make changes to it and save it again. Okay? So if I spell hammer wrong, I could go back in and change it and click, and it should go and upgrade it because I'm not changing the ID. I'm just changing either the name of the product or the quantity of the product. All right, so that's everything basically that's in product. Other than that, I didn't change this. We've seen this stuff before. So that, what I just explained to you, is everything they talk about with a data model that's in the book on pages 396 and 397. All right. Then next they talk about this data handler. I already mentioned these to you, but again, just so you see these, they're the onCreate and the onUpgrade. And if you look in here, this is the bottom of page 398. This says we're working with version 1. These are all just constants that we're using. It's going to make our code more readable to say database version as opposed to saying 1. To say database name as opposed to saying productdb.db. This way, too, remember that if I do end up changing the name of my table, I only have to change it in one place, right? Okay, which is why we use constants anyway. So that's all of our database information and our table information. Here's all of our column information. Remember, this is a real simple example. He's only got one table. There's no joins. There's nothing like that being done in here. All right? And then he's calling this to basically handle everything. And what he's saying is, we're not doing anything special. This is just one of the methods you must implement when you do this. So when you call super, that just says, hey, the parent's handling everything. I'm not doing anything special here on my own. All right? And here, so this is the code that they're putting in. So what are we doing in onCreate? Well, we already mentioned this. That's where, right there, that code that you see right there in blue. That's what they're doing. That's how they're creating the database. This, again, is done very similarly to the way we did it in PHP. But we're saying string, and we're calling it create products table, and this big mess that you see right there, now all that stuff in blue. That's the same kind of thing we would type in. Create table. All right, table products, paren. And then we'd have column ID, etc., etc. Now, they did not mention in here, I'm not sure why the author put all this stuff in uppercase. I don't think you have to do that. I just followed his lead. All right. As I mentioned to you previously, if you upgrade, you drop the existing table and you recreate it. So if for some reason somebody would say, hey, you're working with an old version of the database, that's how you'd fix it. The add handler methods, so these are the ones that we just mentioned before, so I have shown them to you already. All right. So this is the method to insert records into the table. So if we look at what happens in there, notice what we pass in. A product object. All right. And then what we're doing in here is we're attempting, again, to add a new product. This is, for lack of better words, this is saying, Okay, we have now put stuff into the name field and the quantity field that we have in our interface. So these two lines that you see right here in blue, that means that we've put in a value here. All right, so right there, and we put in a value right there. That's what those correspond to, right there. We want this to be writable. And remember, if you choose the Get Writable Database, it both reads and it writes. And then we do the insert. Okay? Now, I mentioned before, the author, I think at least, didn't do a great job in here because did no validation. At a minimum, I would have taken that insert and put that into a try-catch block. All right? Because I might want to eventually end up doing some work on there where I look to see, do I already have something in the database that has that exact same product name? Maybe I don't want to allow that to happen. So I might want to check that. All right? So I would have taken probably either all of this or at least this here and put that into a try-catch block. All right? Then when we're done, that says close the database. So you come in, you basically come in, you end up opening the database, you do your stuff, and you close it. And that's whether you're adding or whether you're coming in here where, again, to find a product, you're opening it, you're doing your stuff, you're closing it. Or when you're deleting, you come in here, you open it, you do your stuff, and you close it. In all three cases, that's what we're doing. All right? And then finally what they do, starting on the bottom of page 401, and they show it really on 402 is right here, they're associating the click events with their three buttons. So there's the new product, there's the lookup product, there's the remove product. All right. And then finally they say, well, what do we have to do in our main file? And that code is on pages 402, 403, and 404. So when we're on create, that's where we create these variables. All right. And this is what we already looked at. There's the code to add a new product. There's the code to look up an existing product. There's the code to remove a product. All right. Then the author says, go back in, change it, compile it, etc. So the big thing, the big takeaway I want you to get from this is there really is nothing super special that we have to do in order to get this to work. Again, it's very, very much unlike what you'll see in the next class. Is your hand up, Luke? Oh. No? Okay. So again, if you are interested in going back and taking a look at it then, if you look at the last couple of examples, have the code in there. Okay? And not only do they have the code in there, as I said, I went back in and I used the stuff that was in the book, but I put comments in there so you could see what was happening along the way. All right? All right. What I'm going to do, we're going to take a break. I'm done basically, but there's one more thing I want to do. And so right now, because I left something upstairs, so I'm going to pause the tape, go upstairs, get it, bring it back down, and show it to you. All right? All right, so what I just handed out to everybody was what you see up on the screen here. So far, you've had 2 assignments, and I have not done a good job of grading them because I've had problems when I've tried to grade them. What I'm going to do on Thursday is I'm going to attempt to grade all period. And if I have problems, I might say, hey, Luke, can you just bring your program up on the screen, and I'll grade it from there. All right, I can look at the code, but I'm not good enough that I can say, oh, yeah, that would work. I can't do that. All right, so you've had the BMI and you've had the currency converter. So for your last program, as it says, you will be creating your own Android app. You don't have to turn it over, but the main difference is here is there it says Android, and on the other side it says iOS Swift. But it's basically the same thing. So the whole thing will be worth 125 points. All right? Your first two projects are going to be worth probably, I think, 25 points each. Okay? So the whole class, for lack of better words, is worth 175 points. All right? And then on that, whatever I put down in there for attendance or whatever on the syllabus, then that'll factor into it too. So it'll be probably around a couple hundred points. All right? So for the first part of the assignment, and now notice, this is due a week from today. All right? So I don't want anybody to say, I didn't know it was due. Yes, it's due a week from today. Thursday will be lab all period. And all I'm asking is that you write down a few paragraphs describing what you'd like to do your app on. A simple explanation of its functionality and how you plan to incorporate the material we've covered either in the book or from developer.android.com, etc. All right, so person X in here raises their hand and says, fine, I have no flaming clue as to what I want to do a project on. Well, I don't want you to do it on your BMI, and I don't want it on the currency converter. But even that to-do app, if you wanted to go and make some big changes to the to-do app and have it write to a database, there are plenty of things that are out there online that show you how to do that. All right? That's originally what we were going to do in here. I thought this was complex enough showing it to you. All right, but if you want, I will tell you. Notice, remember, what do we have? After this week, we've got 7 weeks left. If you haven't started on this yet, I wouldn't say, I'm going to make this really cool 3D game. Because chances are pretty good you're going to run out of time before you get something like that finished. All right, so the dates, again, a week from today. The project requirements that I just mentioned up here, worth 25 points. All right? 3 weeks from today, version 1 of your app. Some kind of a skeletal thing of our, skeletal working view. It may not be totally done, but the interface should be built. You might, if Luke says, I just got black and it's on a white background, it's not going to look like that. That's okay. All right? So that's, like I said, be 3 weeks from today, and you'll turn that in. And then 2 weeks after that, version 2. And basically, it should be just about done then. But if you turn it into me by then I'll have a chance to look at it, maybe make some suggestions, which you may or may not incorporate. It's the same kind of thing, and I mentioned this to you before because some of you have had me look at your resumes. And when I look at a resume, I'll make suggestions. Luke sent me his the other day. And, when I get done and I put some suggestions on there, and I say, I would do this for your cover letter, I would do this for your resume. And if he turns around, he didn't, but if he turns around and says, I like mine better, I'm just using that, that's okay. It's your resume, it's your cover letter. Same kind of thing in here. I'll make suggestions. All right. And then finally, that last Tuesday, you'll turn in the last version. Notice it's worth 40 points. We've got people who are in this class who either have have a full-time job or about to start a full-time job or whatever. All right, so if you cannot, I'm asking everybody to come on that Thursday. But if you can't come on that Tuesday, that's worth 10 points out of the whole thing. Yes?
That Tuesday is the 17th.
Okay, then it's the 17th. Thank you. Well, that would mean that must be the 3rd then. So are they all wrong? Let's see.
Yeah.
Well, that's the 5th. That's the 19th.
19th, you got right.
Yeah, and then that should have been the 3rd. All right, so, but you know what? If you went from being due on Monday, you'd be even better off. How's that? So if for some reason you can't present in front of the class, you could still get 115 out of 125, which would definitely still be an A. So for the rest of this semester, I'm going to lecture on Tuesdays. I'm going to have a topic that we'll talk about every Tuesday, and I'll give you an example program, a totally completed program, and then Thursdays will be lab. Now, just so you know, last thing, in the other class, today we're going to talk about Sqlite, but on Thursday I am going to lecture in the other class so we can talk a little bit about core data. There's not going to be enough time today to go over it. It's complex enough that to do two of them in one period is too much. So, other than the mistake that John was nice enough to point out, and he's right, that I made, so I'll come back here. Come on, kill that. Come on. Try to open it if it'll let me. There we go. So that should be the 3rd, and that should be the 17th. I'll save that. You can save them on yours, but it's been saved out to the P drive, and, whoops, I don't want a new one. I'll do a save as, and I'll save it out there also in PDF format. Yeah, it's because I already got it open. So that's fixed now. May 3rd, May 17th. Okay? Questions on anything we went over today? All right, the rest of the period then is yours.